Hi there, Gauri. My name is Ellen. I'll be correcting this essay for you today. I'm very happy to see that you've submitted an essay for correction so that you can get some feedback in order to prepare for IELTS. Let's take a look at what you've written here. The topic is about ex-prisoners and if they're the best people to talk to youngsters about the dangers of crime. So let's see what you wrote. Expecting the culprits to educate juveniles about the disturbing outcomes after they are freed from jail has to have positive results. While it depends on how much the offender is repenting of committed misdeeds as well as his philanthropic attitude, however, it also depends on the teenager's conceivable attitude. Okay, so what I can tell here is that you're really making a great effort to use some different vocabulary, really rephrase in your own words the topic. The result of that, however, is a number of instances of unnatural language. Okay, some words are better just left as they are in the task, and that's okay. You can use some of them. What you don't want to use is pieces, like chunks and phrases from the task. That is to be avoided, okay? And of course, you do want to use some of your own new words, but this, for example, expecting the culprits to educate juveniles, it was just a little strange to me. Another thing is that I felt like you kind of jumped into this introduction a little too suddenly, and I felt like there needed to be a sentence to kind of introduce the topic in a more appropriate way, okay? Now, I'm okay with the length of this introduction. It's not too long, it's not too short, but I do think that a more of an introductory sentence would have been appropriate here. So we can talk for a minute about what that could have sounded like. So here's my suggestion. Jail has been found to have a positive impact on some former prisoners, and it is often thought that from their firsthand experience, they can help youngsters avoid this path in life. Okay, so something like that. It's essentially introducing the paragraph. Then you don't really need to write this, but what you could just do after that is just write your position, whether you agree with that, whether you don't agree with that, because it says to what extent you agree or disagree. Okay, so I think that that's enough, and you can just go straight into the answer there, the position. Do you agree or disagree? But let's take a look at what you did. This, I'm assuming, is your position. While it depends on how much the offender repents for his committed misdeeds as well as his philanthropic attitude, it also depends on the teenager's conceivable attitude. That phrase doesn't really mean a lot to me. I'm not really sure what that means, the teenager's conceivable attitude. It's rather vague, and so it doesn't really give me a clear understanding of what your position is. It's kind of like you're saying to me, whether this works or not depends on the ex-criminal and the teenager. And I suppose that if you were to write something like that, it would be okay. All right, but the language you used here, like the teenager's conceivable attitude, it was a little unnatural. It was a little strange, I would say. Okay, why don't we, you know what, before we move on, since I already gave you a suggestion before on how you could have done that first sentence, I'm happy to give you a suggestion on how I think your position could have been. So why don't we try this? I believe that having ex-convicts speak to teenagers about crime could be effective if both the ex-convict were truly repentant and the teenagers were receptive to the message. Okay, so that's a suggestion. Let's move on. The most powerful reason why the wrongdoer will be benevolent towards the teenager is remorse. All right, careful here. Wrongdoer is probably not the best synonym for former prisoner. You could have said something like ex-convict. You could have said ex-prisoner. Let's see. Also, benevolent was absolutely not a word you want to use here. We're not talking about benevolence. It's just the wrong word. So, and I think you should have focused on something else. So how about the most powerful reason why the ex-convict's story would be effective for teenagers is remorse. Because of this, the person who has gone through the despicable situation will save the future generation from falling into pitfalls. For example, it was observed in certain rehabilitation centers of the USA, you don't need a comma here, that people having past criminal records were delegated to communicate with adolescents who lived in vulnerable situations, okay, so that they can conceive the dangerous outcomes. Thus, whenever a prior guilty person inculcates integrity based on self-experience, the result is always positive. The second important and rudimentary point is the public-spirited perception of that criminal. If the lawbreaker has a humanitarian attitude, then not only narrating the negative repercussion of offense can change the youngster's thinking, but also safeguard his future. Okay, so what I said before in your introduction continues here. There's some vocabulary that isn't particularly natural. All right, let me see if I can show you some of those. They were delegated to communicate. They could conceive the dangerous outcomes, inculcate integrity, rudimentary point, narrating the negative repercussion. It's just, I understand that these are some higher level words, but it's not enough to just know high level words. You also need to know how to use them appropriately. Okay? So I definitely would like to change some of this around. The other thing that I have a concern about in this paragraph is the ideas. So I want to make sure, yeah. What did you tell us here in your first sentence? You said that the reason why this would work is because the ex-convicts feel guilty. So now if that's the case, then the rest of your paragraph needs to develop that central idea. But what is it that you actually tell us here? You tell us here that one of the benefits is that the youngsters can conceive the outcomes of their crime. And then here you just tell us it's positive. And then you tell us about, I didn't understand this. This was awkward. Public spirited perception. That was strange. The public perception, I guess, would have been okay. But then what does that have to do with this idea about remorse? What does it have to do with, what does the public perception have to do with the attitude of the ex-criminal and the safeguarding the future? So there were a lot of things here that really just didn't fit together. So part of our problem here is vocabulary. Part of the problem is coherence and cohesion, because there are not appropriate links between some of your ideas. All right, and it's difficult to locate a central idea that is developed throughout the paragraph. What you started talking about here is something totally different than what you actually ended up talking about in the body. Let's move on. Even though such an optimistic approach is expected from acquitted criminals, they're not acquitted. Careful, acquitted means something else. Acquitted means that they went to court and the court said, oh, well, this person is not guilty. That's not the case. These people have served time for their crime, so they were found guilty. So acquitted is not the right word. You could have said released. Even though an optimistic approach is expected from released ex-criminals, it cannot be made compulsory. I took out the but because you already have even though. You don't need both, just one. It cannot be made compulsory for the next generation. In spite of the fact that such steps will translate their future, translate is the wrong word. It all depends on the intention, or rather the level of stubbornness grooved in the teenager's mind, which can be a major hindrance. This is because the increased screen time, which has created a complete virtual world for them, has led them to isolation. So, changing the mindset of the teenagers is as important as teaching, tyrant is the wrong word, outcomes to them. Okay, well, the good news is that this tied back to what we talked about here. I think I understand. I guess I'm okay with this. I'm okay with the development of this, so I don't really have a lot to comment on here. So why don't we move on to the conclusion? To conclude, even if the change in society depends on consciousness, still the collective efforts, get rid of still, because you have even if. So to conclude, even if the change in society depends on consciousness, the collective efforts towards betterment always has positive repercussions. All right, that's a little vague. I almost feel like this is something you've memorized to just use whenever. It certainly is not related directly to this essay. And so I wanted to see a conclusion that better links back to what you talked about here, that rephrases your position, and then just leaves us with a thought-provoking comment for the future, perhaps. Okay? So there are some good elements to your writing, but there are some things that I definitely would like to see fixed. Let's see. You only have one essay with us. Let's see if we can get you on the course, Gauri. Let's see if you can sign up for that. I think you'll find it really immensely helpful. I'd love to continue working with you. So let's see how we can continue doing that. All right. Good job and best of luck.